Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Fordham University and its Media and Entertainment Association, we welcome you for our third event of the Digital Media Disruption Lecture Series in 2013. Tonight it's about digital technologies and changing audiences. My name is Axel Rockner, I'm a new co-president of MIA, and I would like to thank our chief panelist and Professor Phil Napoli as our moderator tonight. So, thank you for joining all of us, and let's enjoy the next 60 minutes with our panel. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Phil Napoli and I am the faculty advisor for MIA and also a professor of communication and media management here at Fordham. And this is a topic, this was an easy yes for me, this is a topic that interests me quite a bit. I think there are so many ways where just that notion of changing audiences, it applies in so many different ways, from sort of the changing demographics of the audience to the changing ways that audiences are behaving in terms of how new technologies are facilitating all sorts of new types of interactions with media, and of course changing the way that audiences are measured and thus the representations of the audience that various stakeholders in the media industries deal with, and that of course then leads to the issue of the changing ways in which audiences are valued and monetized by different stakeholders in the advertising sector. And I suspect tonight our conversations are going to touch on a lot of these different elements of this notion of the media audience, which is just as a concept is as great a case study in digital disruption, I think, as we could ask for. So I hope you guys have lots of questions and are ready to engage with the speakers, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce each of them. They're each going to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll get as quick as we can to getting questions and discussion going with you guys as well. Okay. You have their bios in front of you, but I'm going to speak briefly about each of them. Horst Stipp, who is here, is currently the Executive Vice President for Global Business Strategy at the Advertising Research Foundation, and was previously the Senior Vice President for Strategic Insights and Innovation at NBC Universal. And I think at NBC Universal, of all the broadcast networks, are doing more innovative and interesting things in the audience measurements and valuation space, and we've been following what they've been doing around issues like the Olympics and things like that. And of course, was right in the midst of that, and did that. And as you can see, has an incredibly interesting academic background, a PhD in sociology from Columbia, and has been in this field for quite some time. And now, the Advertising Research Foundation is such a great. Having worked with them a few times in the past and taken advantage of their events, it's a fascinating sort of lens into how this whole space works, and of course is a really interesting vantage point now as well. We also have with us today Jake Katz, who is the general manager of Ypulse, and the youngest member of our panel, clearly, and has worked with everyone from Nickelodeon to MTV to NBC Universal to understand trends in youth, and obviously in the realm of, sort of changing audience behaviors, what's happening at the younger level. Is amazing. I saw that firsthand. I have a 3-year-old, and someone handed him an Etch-a-Sketch the other day. An Etch-a-Sketch. A good old-fashioned classic Etch-a-Sketch. And you all know what he did, don't you? iPad, he said. And he could not understand that you had to turn the dials to get the Etch-a-Sketch to work. And it's just very interesting to watch. And the whole notion that he can't watch whatever he wants exactly when he wants it. If he's watching a TV that's not hooked up to a DVR, an on-demand system, it rocks his world. And so what that means is I've been watching nothing but car wash videos for the past 6 months or so, because it turns out YouTube is a source of endless car wash videos, which is what he loves to watch. I'm talking about his cars going through a car wash. So there's some kind of content for every interest out there. And the young folks find it. And then we've got Greg DePalma, who is the VP of Audience Insights at TiVo TRA, and alum of our program, and so we're happy to have him come in and talk to us. He has previously worked as Senior Director of Brand Marketing at LendingTree, where he managed brand equity, advertising, and media. And you can see all the other sort of, you work also at Nielsen, you're in Nielsen as well, for stuff, right? So we've got, there we go. But I'll stop there and let these folks start. Why don't we start with you, Greg? We'll go Greg, then Jake, then Horst. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I have a couple slides.
Take it away, and
right.
Max will get you all set up. And I will be, 10 to 10 minutes, and this will be waving frantically if I want you to stop talking.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through what I'm here to talk about today, or my perspective is TV 3.0. So I think about 3 generations of TV growth, and it started out with the family all around one screen. And this is the first year, 30 years of TV, from 1950 to about the 80s. And then in the 80s, video killed the radio star, MTV launched, HBO, ESPN, CNN, and so forth. Now we have the family, each with one screen. And this is actually my household. I was presenting this at a conference, and I looked to my left, and I'm like, I gotta take a snapshot, because this is what happens every night. And this is what we're all talking about, is the disruption of digital, especially the growth of the tablets in particular is really disrupting TV. So at TiVo, we disrupted TV as well, and Horst probably didn't like us too much when he was at NBC. A friend at Fox, it was like, oh, we hated TiVo when they came out, right? Because everyone said, oh, commercial skipping, there goes our inventory, their costs are going to go down. And what TiVo's 3.0 is all about personalization, right? The thumbs up if you like shows, just the way you design digitally your own Yahoo homepage, wherever you start, or your Twitter followers. It's about apps, right? It's about portability. We have the TiVo Stream that lets you take your DVR recorded shows right to your iPad, right? And you can take them to go. You don't have to be connected to the internet. And then we also have our user interface. So, when you're searching for a program and you're typing in A and you scroll over and so forth, we've actually embedded the first QWERTY remote control. Just pictured up there. So that's our 3.0. And then now we're looking at over the top, which means people who are cutting their cable cord and saying, I'm not going to pay Time Warner or a cable provider X amount a month for TV. I'm going to go over the top and get my information either, and we were talking about this, the younger generation, just like Napster, they are stealing programs and actually movies online. But a lot of people are getting it through the websites, through Netflix is actually surpassed HBO with about 30 million subscribers, and Hulu Plus is big as well. So there's a lot of different ways that people are getting TV programming digitally through non-traditional TV sources. I thought this was real interesting, and I like the spin on it. So Martha Stewart has shut down her channel and her program. The excuse, but I actually think it makes sense, is that DIY content is better on the second screen, right? Or the third screen, actually, as it was quoted in the magazine. Because when you think about it, if you think about challenges to local news, you got a half hour that repeats sports, news, top stories, weather, and traffic. You could get that in 5 minutes with a customized feed that's on your computer projected to a screen or just on your tablet. So Martha Stewart as well is, do I need a half hour? No. Why don't I create how-tos and people can get the information when they need it, where they want it. Finally, just 2 last slides though. This is based on TiVo households, which are early adopters, but what we see at TiVo is where the market is 6 months a year. So it's like Wall Street. Wall Street predicts where the market, the economy is going a year out. So TiVo, when we look at our data, we're looking at the future of where consumers are going to be. So we have 54% of our customers have Netflix versus the 30 million or 25% in the US. And then we see Amazon On Demand, iTunes and Hulu and so forth. And this is where they're watching video programming. And then the other thing that's interesting is we've seen the amount of time spent on Netflix growing every single month. And this has actually increased since I created this chart to about 30% of the TiVo households watch more than 10 hours of Netflix each month. So it varies by demographic and it varies by time in prime time. There's sometimes if you're in a neighborhood and you all have the same cable system at prime time, the Netflix may be a little choppy because everyone's logging in at the same time. Bandwidth is challenged. So that's just a couple of the last slide we have is where we think the future of TV may go. And we could actually have some interesting conversations. But basically, they're trying to get to the way digital is. Serve the ad to the consumer who is most likely to buy your product when they're in the mood to buy that. So here's an example of banner ads across the top. You can customize the programs and say, okay, Aflac just wants to be on these programs. So when you hit pause and when you go to your playlist and say, now the program, would you like to delete it or save it, an ad pops up then instead of during the programs where you're skipping the commercials. So there's a lot of different ways that advertisers and agencies are getting away from the DVR disrupting to making advertising more friendly to the consumer.
Thank you. So, Jake?
Hi everybody. I don't know if you noticed, but I have the same sweater on that I have in my picture. So I promise I actually do own more clothes than this. So my perspective is a little bit different. The same school of thought, the same ecosystem. I'm a researcher by trade. Prior to a company called Ypulse, I was with MTV and NBC Universal as well. And in all of those roles, I had the benefit of being able to be at brands who've been targeting multiple generations and help them kind of rethink about what they do and what they offer to tune to a millennial mindset. And I think I first heard the word millennial on MTV. It seemed like it was a strategy there to help Gen Xers and boomers who have been creating content for multiple generations rethink about what traditional youth themes meant for a generation that had slightly different cultural context. So currently with a company called Ypulse, I'm general manager, and we do youth market research for a ton of different brands. And I think what we're really interested in, and what the world seems to be really interested in right now, is basically the millennial generation. Why? Because frankly, the word disruptive is synonymous with the word millennial. This is a generation that comes from a certain cultural context where they've been raised to believe that their opinion matters, and they've had technology at their fingertips to enact change, make their voice be heard. I won't ask this room to raise their hand and tell me how many people have online dated before, but I think you can see cultural change and cultural innovation happening as a result of disruptive technology. And so what that means is digital media and how people consume media is frankly just up in the air altogether. It's a really exciting time. I think the bottom line is people are consuming more media, more television shows, more digital content than ever before. Brands that have been kind of servicing customers and offering them content are struggling with. How do we A, measure this, which is a fascinating conversation, and how do we B, kind of monetize and sell and understand how consumers are viewing this content and want to buy from it. And so basically, the things to think about with millennials, by the way, this is anyone ages 11 to 31. Definitions vary. Ypulse, and just in my background, I'm just a reader of Neil Howe, who coined the term. Although happy that everybody kind of debate the actual cutoff of millennials. So that includes a variety of life stages: tweens, teens, young adults, parents. And what this means is basically there is major cutoff differences in this generation. But it's really interesting for today's topic because millennials are technology natives, as we all know. What this means is if you understand these consumers, you kind of see how cultural innovations, cultural changes are manifestations of who they are as consumers. This is the largest generation, they're more diverse, and they're frankly shapers of the new world. So I think that's going to be my perspective today. Thanks for having me. And we have 2 slides.
Well, I don't have any. However, since Phil was saying such nice things about the Advertising Research Foundation along the public service message, I left a few brochures out there. The Advertising Research Foundation has a group called Young Pros, and if you're under 30, you qualify, and I highly recommend it for students and people who are involved in the program for networking and learning more about the business perspective. The Advertising Research Foundation is very committed to helping young people to connect their studies with contacts to to the business world. So thank you for having me here. Allow me 2 comments on the presentation that we just saw. The first one would be in Greg's presentation about disruption at TiVo. So that was really very interesting because one of their first executives had an office like across the hall from me, and we talked often, and then he left and went to TiVo. But as disruptive as TiVo was, they did something incredibly smart, I believe, and that's why they're still around. They understood that there is a framework, and within that framework, you may be better off if you limit your disruption in certain kind of ways. Because there was a competitor, a company called Replay, who offered a product which was almost identical, except they put a big fat button right there on the remote that would skip over all the commercials. So all the networks who are usually fighting each other got together to sue them out of business, and they were quite successful. TiVo, in contrast, from the start, employed people who came out of the world of television and said, well, people want to be able to fast forward through the commercials, and the networks, just like Greg said, aren't going to be happy about that, but they're not going to be able to sue us for that. And so maybe we should play along a little bit, and TiVo never presented itself as like an enemy of the business model. Still, it was a challenge, but it supplied employment security for me, in the sense that I came up with this idea of doing a study to document that even if you watch commercials in fast forward, there would still be a positive effect. And we did a study using biometrics, eye tracking, and so on, that actually showed that because people, when they fast forward through commercials, their eyes are focused on the screen, right? Think about it. If you're just sitting there vegging, using your phone and doing your tablets and doing all kinds of things and have the TV running in the background, that's one thing. And you're probably not paying all that much attention to it. But if you manipulate your viewing with your TiVo, you select your favorite program, you fast forward through the commercials, you're very actively involved, and your eyes are on the screen with great concentration because you don't want to miss the beginning of the program after the commercial break, because God knows what they're up to. So we were able to show that when people do that, even if the commercial is seen in fast forward, there's a high recognition, especially the commercials they've already seen. Sometimes, and TiVo has fantastic data on that, showing that people replay commercials that they like, so you actually get additional exposure. So that's my comment on TiVo. And with regard to Jake, the whole millennial issue, and how do people who are growing up in this digital environment, and how it affects the way they consume the media, and all of these issues, what the implications are for the future of advertising, and so on and so on. It's a fascinating issue. We were just talking earlier, saying, there's a lot of competition in this space, because a lot of companies are looking, doing research on that, and companies like NTV, are like totally dependent on understanding what this generation wants from the media and how they're using the media. Having said that, as a researcher, and that's sort of my main thing, I think the most fascinating issue and the most difficult issue in that area is, to what extent can we predict future behavior based on what we see now? So in other words, if an 18-year-old goes to college and does not have a cord, does not have a DVR, only uses a computer for TV viewing, does that mean that when they're 25 or 30, or maybe have a family or whatever they're going to get themselves into, are still going to be like that? Or are they going to say, well, now I want a 60-inch TV with a sports package and a package for my kids and all of that, and so of course we're going to subscribe to cable. So what can we learn from today's research about media use among this generation, and to what extent can we really extrapolate to the future? And my point here would be that too often, especially the trade press and the popular press, we see these very simplistic assumptions that, oh, because they're different today, they're going to be different forever. And it's almost like, you know, they're being treated sometimes by people my age or so as sort of like, you know, the strange tribe of people that we don't understand. And because they do all these things differently today, they're not just going to be really, really weird going forward too, and so on. So I think it's a fascinating issue and maybe a topic of interest to discuss. I've spoken about it.
I want to first toss out a question, and this is, we have, you know, different types of audience researchers here, and this is like sort of boring, dry academic question for my own selfish interest. I'll get out of the way first, and then what each of you your take on sort of the ways we gather information about audiences today are changing a lot. I'm curious to get each of your perspective on what you see as sort of the most interesting and the most sort of fruitful sort of new source of information that you're utilizing today. Like, I'm assuming, Jake, you guys aren't just about phone surveys and mall intercepts anymore, which is sort of the old model of market research. And, you know, I mean, what are some of the new and, you know, ways, you know, again, right, technologically driven sort of, you know, some of the new types of data about audiences that you guys are finding valuable, and how are you getting it?
Yeah, I think that what I've found just in talking to so many different brands about what they want out of research is basically, and as a result, you know, our business drives off of what our clients want. So what that means, I find there's two different camps and schools of thought when it comes to how research is used within brands. There's inspiration, so let me get a little bit of consumer insight at the forefront of the creative process. And then there's measurement. Okay, the product launched, how did it do, what people say about it. And my feeling is that traditionally research has always existed and played a big role in the measurement sphere. And the growing area is inspiration. And so inspiration has new, and that seems to be where a lot of the new methodologies are. So the obvious one is mobile, so mobile surveys. Frankly, smaller sample sizes, just high touch and direct access with your target audience in real time. What do they think of this? Great, we're going back to the drawing board. What do they think of this? Great, we're going back to the drawing board. And at launch, get that same kid to give us feedback, talk to his friends. There's a lot going on there. I think that overall, online qualitative is just a fascinating area. There's a lot of growth in how people are talking to their customers. Little micro communities, big communities that last a year long, very high touch. Does that answer?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I mean, there's one term that's been beating me over the head lately. It's big data, and you're talking about sort of more, you know, more micro approaches to understanding audiences. And there's still a use for that approach as well.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, big data. I mean, I think that when you talk about media and then the audience that I study, big data is a great thing, and it's also can be kind of a scary thing. So make no mistake, I'm not implying that big data is out the window. Just when you're going to take a poll on how many kids, for example, use Snapchat, I mean, that's going to be out of date within 3 months. And I think big data is important, but it's very, you have to be very creative in what you're measuring, how often you're measuring it. And as a result, you enter kind of a very high-touch online qualitative exercises and methodology.
Yeah, I mean, of course, in your case, you talked a little bit, you just mentioned the issue of also biometrics and things like that, and you can sort of have your finger on the pulse of some interesting new sort of ways of understanding audiences.
Well, there are two issues. One is you want to measure how much people use media so the advertiser knows the likelihood of the commercial being seen. So it just tells you what people are doing. So for that, you can use Nielsen. TiVo has good data on that, and you know, more big data are being used for that, set-top data and all of that. But what they don't tell you is the kind of stuff that Jake has focused on, which is why people do what they do. Why do they behave this way? Why do they choose this medium, and so on. And of course, that kind of question is just as important, and I think that's the area where you have tremendous growth in using new kind of information, even though on the currency front, namely how much time do people spend, you get new impulses also from big media and kind of set-top box data that I just mentioned.
I mean, I think in your case it's particularly interesting. You guys really evolved from into a research company to some extent, right? I mean,
right. I think to build on that, the word that we're using, or the phrase, is naturally occurring data. So it's a take on big data. So in the old days, you would create a test environment. Let's take a TV commercial copy test. You would put, the first thing is the qualitative, you put some storyboards, you show commercial, focus group, and get some feedback. Then it moved to online, let's show the ad, and let's ask some questions. Now, we have the ability to see how people are fast forwarding certain ads. So it's naturally occurring. The other thing is the digital side of that. Naturally occurring feedback is people tweeting about it. So measuring the tweets and the conversations, taking that and saying, okay, is it a positive spin? What's when someone is talking about the brand, is it positive, negative, neutral? And then the other part about that is all about this mobility. And I've seen some interesting new prototypes where there's things where, aside from tracking where you're going, there's near field recognition where when your device gets in touch with another point, that you can have offers made to you. So for example, if you're walking and you have this app, coupons can come up as you walk by stores that you say I'm interested in. So there's ways now that you can track where people are moving. They used to use heat maps in stores. They would say, okay, we're going to measure the way people go through and shop. So there's all different ways of what we call naturally occurring data. So we're taking out that test environment where you put someone in a room or a place that's not natural. And so in the classic case of qualitative it's called ethnography. You sit in the back of someone's room and you watch the way they interact with the TV, the computer, and so forth. After a while, like a reality show, they forget there's researchers in the back. That's qualitative, that's the why. And then we look at the big data naturally occurring.
Start tossing it out to the crowd here. Any questions for these guys? Again, one of them individually or the group as a whole?
What's the state of cross-media measurement? There's a lot of talk about that, but when I try to dig down, I'm not sure, how much is actually happening. Where you can measure multiple devices and put all those data together.
Well, I can start just because we launched our cross-media product about 3 weeks ago. So there's, once again, there's two. So everyone wants to know the same person, how they're watching TV. What are the same commercial that is online on their PC that they can get on their mobile device, and then on, whether it's a tablet or a smartphone. So nobody's mastered that. The best thing right now is Nielsen has a small panel. It's like 10,000, and the rest of the companies are fusing data sources together. So to get technical, it's you say, okay, here's households that look like this, here's households that look like that, here's what they watch, here's what they do on their smartphones and on their tablets. We actually have a panel of 500,000 homes where we collect all the viewing, and then we have all their cookie information, so we can track someone who's been exposed to different ads on TV and digitally, and we have an agency that's looking at trying to optimize video. So they just want to see how the same person who watches the ad online video versus TV. So it's a very tough research question right now. No one's nailed it. We're far from perfect because you have to cookie, you have to get the advertiser to tag it. Horst, you may be more familiar with some of the ESPN work and the work at the ARF. So.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up, and it's true. The progress is very slow, and to be candid about it, the reason for that is there are a bunch of big companies that do measurement, and so it's a holy grail. And if you get that business, that would be a really, really good thing. So Nielsen obviously is a very big player. To Greg's point, what ESPN has done is they invested, estimates are about $2 million to get started with the cross-media measurement, and they actually got Nielsen and Comscore and different companies to work together in Arbitron. Now what ESPN is doing now is a cross-media measurement, trying to achieve all of these things but focus on their business, which is television, online, and radio. Right? ESPN is very big in radio. So, so it's a really, really difficult thing because just did a report at the ARS about this issue. As more and more media are being consumed, and as more and more cross-media is taking place, on the question of how much do people consume, it gets harder and harder to get accurate information from surveys. So you need some kind of passive measurement, like the cookies, for that kind of question. Now, just to be clear, this is about finding out how much people are consuming. For the question that Jake addressed, which is why, and really understanding consumer, that's a whole different thing. But for that question, it's progress is very, very slow, and surveys just don't cut it anymore. And everybody's kind of struggling. And the ARS has these conferences, and at every conference for the last 5 years or so, this has been one of the major topics. And yes, there's progress, but there's nothing close to the quality of the TV currency that people are still using. And if you think about it, well, it's really, really easy to do measurement of just what people watch on TV compared to this multimedia stuff. So it's so much harder to do, and nobody's really done it. It'll be very interesting to see what ESPN, how that turns out, because if it works, or if ESPN wants to do that, is to turn it into a syndicated service, so that they have different companies, media companies, as well as advertisers, come in and put money together so that the study can be continued on a regular basis. They put in the couple $1 million as seed money to get it started.
Yeah, I mean, nothing specific to add to that, just because my world is a little bit less about measuring actual behavior and more about kind of polling and surveying and doing research from the consumer standpoint. It does seem, though, that ironically the disruptions within technology is the reason we're having such a hard time measuring it. It's like a TV show premieres, and how do you even begin to understand how many people actually watch that? And the younger you look at Nielsen ratings, the more complex and confusing it gets. Frankly, if you have 13-year-olds, watching HBO Go, and they're talking about who are their parents, friends, some password, and then you have kids downloading stuff on BitTorrent. It's like, there isn't that one metric that captures all of that. And in my world, I think that's what we're fascinated by and interested in finding and discovering. What is the 2.0 version of that Holy Grail Nielsen metric?
What do you guys, in each of your different experiences, if I were to ask you, right, some of the most economically significant change in audience behavior you're seeing in your work? By economically significant, I mean sort of either A, its potential to disrupt sort of established business models, or on the other side of that coin, its potential to facilitate new business models. So in other words, what the most dramatic, whether it's within a particular demographic group or sort of across, across larger sectors of the population. I mean, what changes in audience behavior that you imagine that we're going to look back on and say those had real bona fide, economic impact, strategic impact, whatever the case may be.
But everybody thinks it has to do with the internet, but it's not. It's fragmentation of television. Yeah. There was a time when 30% of the country watched The Cosby Show. And now NBC is happy when they have 1 million viewers. Let me not exaggerate, but the highest rating, you can go down in history. Cosby 33, Seinfeld 15, American Idol 15. American Idol is down to like 7 ratings and stuff like that. And all these programs that are on cable channels. I mean, I think it's the biggest disruption in the business.
I mean, I think there's a few going on. I think one of the big, so from my perspective, one of the big trends we see is culturally, it's been a really bad economy out there, and there's a lot of 20-somethings who are very physically close with their parents, whether they're living at home or living at home some of the time. So as a result, marketing is kind of being reinvented. How do you pitch, a $30,000 car to consumers that are 25 but living with their parents, and you're kind of targeting both of them. So I think the gap between...
now, you're targeting both of them because you got this guy who lives at home who's thinking about blowing 30 grand on a car, and you don't want the parent to be pissed. You're spending 30,000 on a car. Is it that the parents are kicking in for the car? Or
exactly. And I think that, like first-time home buyers, first-time car buyers, I mean, these are all decisions that are being, co-created and co-decided between kids and parents more so than ever before in history. I think the second thing is, in addition to kind of the parental and kid influence on each other, is we just did a big study about online shopping. It's really fascinating to see the gap between discovery and inspiration and point of purchase is shrinking and shrinking. So Pinterest has done that to consumers, which is you're going to discover something in the same form you're going to click buy. And so you watch what that's going to do to marketers. In the same context, you watch what like Amazon is going to do to selling. Basically, Amazon is taking all the consumer behaviors of Google and putting them inside an online store. So I think these little pieces poking at a culture have, massive economic implications as well as marketing implications, and just frankly, interesting little nuances in how people are behaving differently.
Yeah, I think it's when the digitalization process. So in 2006, all the broadcasting had to switch over from analog to digital. That was the point where TV is now challenged with the same thing that music was challenged with by Napster when it went to digital. The same thing that newspaper was challenged when it went digital on the internet. The same thing, it's when the technology is the digitization. Even the movie industry is going to be challenged, and we see that in just the way that the releases go are a lot tighter now. Right? It's, hey, we're going to release it analog in the theater, and we're going to do this. And yeah, now worldwide. And so digitization has made it very easy to take something that historically had a certain distribution process and now makes it a lot easier. So I think it's when you see something turned into shopping, we just talked about that, digitalizing. We digitalized a store. Here's a picture of it online, 3D. Home shopping, mortgage shopping. I worked at LendingTree before I worked at TiVo. They did, that changed the process. So whenever something moves towards digital, look out, major disruption.
What do you think about something like TiVo? This is the service for Harvard and on the campuses of the big universities and Yale, where they offer now to the students free broadcast and cable and HBO to all the tablet devices as long as they're on the campus. And when they leave the campus, they don't have access anymore. And the idea is, what I understood is that they get hooked up on cable, because normally students are not the primary cable customers, but they get the experience, and once they leave the university, they have the experience, and then they would like to have cable. Like, so the predictions and the...
But only the Ivy Leaguers get it. Those are going to be able to afford cable when they graduate. Right, got it.
That's how they started.
Something like that can cut two ways, right? I mean, once you're buying your stuff always on sale, it's hard to pay full price. And once you get the stuff for free and then somebody's supposed to pay for it, that can rub you the wrong way too, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that really...
The Wall Street Journal has been using that model here on campus. We got business students, undergraduate business students, there's free copies of the Wall Street Journal all over the place. And the hope is always, and it's been like that for years. And now you go to the business school building and they see a paper, and you're like, what the hell is that doing here? But they're still trying that model, and some students are still reading the paper for free. But the hope is that when they leave, they'll be compelled to have a paycheck.
But do you think it's like there's a model behind it, or do you think that HBO is like, are they desperate to get into the students' homes that they just pitch that thing? Is there a research behind this from your audience research perspective?
Yeah, I think we jump on that. I mean, I think that I think it's very smart. I think it feels very clear they're trying to innovate in a very safe environment and see if that works and they can replicate it elsewhere. When I was at MTV and at Universal, I mean, it's fascinating how hard it is to disrupt that model, the ad sales model. And you can't forget that what drives the business of television is eyeballs. So it's actually a good thing when you have more eyeballs. It's a bad thing when you can't measure those eyeballs. So it's often scary if you don't know where somebody's watching it. It doesn't count. And so I think that if you can use something like that to say, cable providers kind of hold this whole situation hostage. If you can do something like that and then basically have different segments of people, you can, more strategically sell advertisements to certain types of consumers, right? So Harvard or wherever else they're doing that, they're just what if you did it basically, neighborhoods in New York, and you kind of could segment them that way. More eyeballs is always a good thing for television. I think, not being measured is always a bad thing. So that, that'd be my answer. I think it's clear they're trying to innovate and figure it out. And a lot of times we find these deals with TV networks are sold for like 3 to 5 years. Or if you break, rating in there, basically you have to make up for it somewhere else. It's like you can't say, oh, we're going to start counting this over here, and this bakes into your number. Like, no, we signed that contract 3 years ago. We're talking about live same-day viewing, and all around us things are changing.
Yeah, just one point on that is there's the high-value customer there, right? It's Ivy League if they start there. So I didn't go to Ivy. I went to Bucknell, just short of it, but I was offered my first credit card there, and it was American Express, and I have that card today. It was the first one offered. They say, hey, this is a good idea, let's get it right, and it comes through your parent, maybe they co-sign, or so there's the opportunity cost. They say, well, what's the opportunity cost? Well, if we don't give it to them, they're going to steal it or going to do that, and they're going to get used to it. Coke and Pepsi spend all their money targeting 12 to 24-year-olds because by the time you graduate college, you're going to be a Coke or Pepsi drinker for life. So there's certain things that people believe in, it's worth the investment, and when you think of high-value Ivy League, those are the future leaders. That's the person that you want exposed to the beauty of having 85 channels on campus versus stealing, or we used to huddle around the one TV room down in the Commons, which a lot of schools still. Actually, my intern, I learned a lot about this summer. They had, they all stole TV except for one person had cable, and they went to that person's house to watch the premiere of Gossip Girls live, right? So.
No, I totally agree. I just want to add one other aspect that was raised in your question, which is there research on it? And that's really a fascinating question because some do and some don't. At NBC, you had the same experience I did. I think a very strong research culture. Not throughout the many years that I was there. There was some time when there were executives who said they didn't need research. They thought it was smart place to be who didn't need research either. So, very strong research there. Fox is known for not doing very much research. CBS has a facility in Las Vegas, strongly research oriented. Has a very strong head of research who's part of their board. So it really differs. And honestly, I have no idea what it's like at HBO. Since HBO is not dependent on advertisers, they may be a little less research oriented, and then maybe just doing this sort of well, it seems to work, but we don't really impart data on it. So there's still a great variation from company to company to what extent they use research to actually measure return on investment for these kind of initiatives. To give you an example, at NBC, speaking about the research culture, the first show that we put on online was The Office, and we did the research. We did research to estimate to what extent that would cut into the TV audience. And overwhelmingly, the study showed that people said, well, I'll watch it online if I miss it on television. And then some people said, well, it would be a good idea to put stuff online because, discovering shows that I otherwise don't see. And that turned out to be, in fact, both true. So it was a home run. And that was really the beginning of everything being available online too, because we realized that it would not disrupt the business model. I think we used the phrase. It did not disrupt the model. It did not diminish the core TV audience. And the Olympics was the same thing. That's why, they went wild in London putting everything online because we knew that would not hurt the Olympics, and in fact the TV ratings were higher than ever. Which nobody expected, by the way. Nearly everybody was convinced it would go the other way, that there would be cannibalization.
You mentioned HBO. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how they're offering or talking about offering a streaming-only service, and also if you see ad-supported networks maybe following suit, offering a similar business model behind it.
Well, I was over at HBO's office yesterday.
Inside information spill.
Yeah. Well, we were proposing a solution to say, hey, you can measure, because of our cross-media, you can look at all the viewing of your programs, and is there cannibalization or is it building? It's a tough question. HBO has, and I don't have any insight to what they're going to do, HBO has been one of the tightest holders of content, because content is king, okay? And so they say you have to subscribe through a cable operator to get access. If they move to this model, that opens up a whole can, right? And it's when they do that, it's similar to actually when Disney did the deal with Netflix to say that we're going to have our first run of our movies on Netflix, not on the cable channels. So this is in like 2015. Sony is the only movie house that does not have a deal with Netflix. If Netflix gets Sony, Netflix is in a monster position. So the only thing that's really holding, and I don't have any inside information, I would not invest in a company like a Time Warner or Comcast, because that model is 1 or 2 years away from major disruption. And as soon as they lose an NFL contract or some major sports contract that you can get online, that blows the entire affiliate network business right out of the water. So that's what's holding them. That's what's boosting the ratings to NBC this year was football, and that's what boosted the NFL. The cable ratings went up because the NFL network added Thursday night football. I mean, that's literally how big sports moves the network ratings. So it's a huge decision, and it's going to be real interesting to see if they hold on to that. And at some point you have to say, okay, when do I make this stuff available, right? It's because people are they want it this way. And so it's going to be a tough call for them. So I mean, I'm not sure if how they roll it out. There's the question, do they roll it out to just college kids and say, okay, we're going to tier, you have to prove that you are in this demographic, like they've done with the campus. So I'm not sure where they're going to go with it. I don't know what I would do. I haven't seen the financials, but it's a big decision.
I'm going to jump in on that too, because there's one of the interesting things when we look at the history of disruption in all these different media sectors. You have these intermediaries, whether it's cable systems or local broadcast stations or movie theaters, which went berserk when, what was the studio that wanted to offer film available same day as theatrical release on demand for like $50? Like Tower Heist last year or the year before that. But you know, those, or record labels for that matter, sort of these different intermediaries for whom aren't necessarily the content creators. Their business model comes under threat, and they actually have some very powerful ways, at least early on, to really try to slow the rate of disruption. So the TV everywhere model that these cable systems are trying to put into place to sort of keep the content locked down with a traditional subscription, that might really slow. It might be longer than we think, just because of that sort of bottleneck position they've been able to sort of leverage for so long.
But what if they offer additional content? So basically, you start a new network which is only available online. So that would not disrupt the business model, but it would provide you with additional outcomes. Just like on a cable package, you have HBO 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So now there would be HBO 8 online. Maybe that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's good.
And it could be for the kind of target audience that you specialize in.
Right, like girls and stuff that appeals right at the younger demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall that type of thinking, HBO just goes straight to the consumer, bypass cable provider, is representative of just a bigger trend of taking up the middleman. I mean, anybody here know Warby Parker glasses? And they're advertising like crazy on Facebook. Airbnb, there's a company called Lyft where you turn your personal car into a taxi. This is just, in a world where the producer can go straight to the consumer, it's not surprising that's where it's going to go. I think the days of things being held hostage by these middlemen like cable providers are just dissolving. I mean, they have to be, right?
You've been filming. Sorry. You've been focusing on the migration of the broadcast channels to the web. I'm more interested, as you described, the other way around. People creating their own channels on the web, like TED, and just bypassing cable and having direct access to their clients, to the consumers. Now, how that impacts the broadcast channels in terms of this low cost of content, basically free content from TED and other sites like that, disrupting the broadcast channels and the advertising models. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it feels Awesomeness TV is also an interesting one, and that's YouTube's channel. Literally,
and YouTube also, YouTube's subscription channels bypassing cable.
Yeah, I think what it seems to still come down to at this moment in time is that people perceive big networks to have bigger production budgets. So things like TED and Awesomeness TV, it's like they're never going to make Game of Thrones, right? But once it gets to that place where the advertising model is established and content gets better and stronger, we'll see it get there.
But that content is a distraction, I think, too. I mean, if I have so many hours a day to watch content, I can watch TED versus cable with commercials, etc. I might watch more TED.
But you know what I do? I'm watching Game of Thrones, and or yes, like I'm watching Justified last night, and during the breaks, even though I've recorded it, I use that commercial break to watch something else online or do something else. So they almost work, and sometimes they almost sort of end up having this sort of complementary relationship to each other.
No, and I actually agree with you. I mean, funny or die, right? College humor. So the other thing that's transforming in the video world is shorter form, right? TED's shorter form.
Right.
YouTube, once again, that was an important date when YouTube launched. And the scary thing is, if you think of how much money Apple and Google have to build and buy those programs. So Netflix paid approximately $200 million for Game of Thrones. Big risk, right? But you take Yahoo and Google money, right? That's a drop in the bucket. So these guys could go out, and if Apple says, I'm going to launch Apple TV and I'm going to bait the NFL, right? X amount of dollars, and I'm going to make it widely available. That's a huge risk. Google as well. And Google's doing some test markets where they've laying their own fiber and creating, these markets where they're testing these new distributions. So, the whole thing about cutting out the middleman, it's like manufacturer suggested retail price. Well, you know what? There's no more suggested anymore. The distribution, the 3-tier distribution model just adds, my dad worked in the wine and spirits, 30% profit to the distributor, 30-40% to they hear, hey, let's go right direct. So that's what the internet, that's the disruption there, is you're cutting out the middleman.
And the content's getting better.
And the content's getting better. I mean, Funny or Die, you've got Will Ferrell behind it. Crackle TV's got Seinfeld behind it. That's another one. And so my friend works for Google YouTube. He's producing original content. And so all of a sudden they're going to come out, and YouTube's going to, really say, hey, we've got these movies, we've got these originals, and so forth. So at the end of the day, the people who have the money that can produce the content that people want, whether it's low quality or high quality, it's the content that people want are going to win because that attracts the eyeballs.
Yeah, let me just add one aspect to all of that. I think we need to be careful, though, and not to have a distorted view of what viewing behavior and media use behavior is like. Judging maybe from our own behavior or from that of our friends as, that would be representative. If you look at the amount of time, even though the measurements aren't like 100% perfect, we have a pretty good idea. The amount of time that people spend with YouTube makes YouTube like a big cable network, not as big as ESPN.
Well, ESPN's different. ESPN sports. People like to watch sports live. I mean, that's a different kind of category than just watching other broadcast content.
And I think even NBC and CBS and Fox are still bigger. So it's a little different for people in their 20s. But then from an economic point of view, because of their numbers and their income and all of that, and because they have always watched considerably less television than 40, 50, 60. They're not really quite that important from an economic point of view. So if you look at the average numbers, here's a nice little thing. HBO girls, right? All this press, cool, avant-garde, what have you. Available on HBO Go. I think about 95% of viewers of girls watch girls on HBO, not on HBO Go. So it's there, hardly anybody uses it. But it's like, it's the future's here, all this stuff is available. The same thing is true for a lot of television shows. DVR use, as you guys measure, and contradict me if you think I'm not right, DVR use is so much more important than viewing online for established TV shows. And all of these new services, Funny or Die, I love all of that stuff, and so on. And yes, there was just a report in the New York Times today how Animal Planet is doing well with, showing cute animals with webcams doing cute things, and people watch it for 14 minutes, which is more tuning duration than a lot of other shows get. The tuning duration for television is just so much larger, and a lot of YouTube stuff and all the stuff that we're talking about is short-term viewing. So if the viewing duration is five minutes or so, one episode of NCIS, 60 minutes, there we go. So it takes a lot of people to make up for it. So let's not have a distorted view of that we're already in an age where everything has been disrupted. There's so much old-fashioned media behavior still going on.
Just to Greg's point about the content people want, I mean, what extent is data being used in the production and writing process?
Well, I'm not as familiar with how the data is used on the production side. I mean, I know probably, Horst, you'd be better to answer this. I mean, I know there's a lot of research that goes in, like shows like what's the OC and the stuff that MTV created. A lot of that came out of research.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can touch on that. So research played a big role in content creation at Viacom. I guess from the standpoint of thought leadership and understanding how the generation is different than previous generations. So if you understand the cultural context and the themes that are the millennial flavor of MTV territory. So for example, the theory, I work in a study there called the Millennial Edge Study. It's basically, if you imagine a boat going through the ocean, picture all the waves breaking at the front, and then the waves towards the back. It was like there's brands that target the same demographic, but the territory MTV owns is that at the front. So what is the millennial flavor of that territory? Rebellion, standing out, fitting in, and then develop shows that kind of reflect and mirror it. So you see shows like Awkward come out. I mean, Awkward would have never done well for Gen X and their youth because it just thematically doesn't reflect that. So I think it's less, I mean, my feeling was there's the traditional consumer insights, and then I never saw anything that was like beta testing content and measuring it and trying to project ratings off of that. Just a ton of consumer insights. The theory was audience intimacy, so get creators and developers inside the boardroom with millennials themselves and really kind of understand what's happening in their world.
How do the writers feel about it?
It's good. I mean, I think it was, good question, Clearly you have some that are, it's a fascinating environment because some people are literally pop culture hounds who just come off from lunch with, Beyonce's manager. And then you have people who wouldn't know a 19-year-old if they smacked them with a skateboard because they live on the Upper West Side and they, are on EVP and have the black cars come up every day. So, I mean, that was, a strategic challenge, right? How do you build a research culture, which is a panel on itself? Overall, I think consumer insights play a huge role in really inspiring people to kind of think differently about how to make shows for you.
I'm going to take ask one final question for this group. You're going to give a bit of career advice to the folks here as far as what you do, as far as being someone, a professional moving into this field, and how you would recommend they stay as knowledgeable as they need to be or should be about audiences and how they behave and how these behaviors are changing, etc. What would you tell folks?
The advice that I give to everyone is if you like math, go into stuff that is all numbers, like statistics, engineering. My old boss didn't fire, but let go of the entire marketing department and hired literally rocket scientists and the smartest mathematicians he could find in Silicon Valley to run his marketing. There's something called programmatic buying of TV, which we talked big data. Data is driving so much in the future. So I think if you go into and you're a specialist, it's like the actuarial. People said, hey, if you become an actuarial, you'll always have work because it's needed. You're very specialized. So I think specializing in engineering, math, and science is tied to the creative stuff that you like. But if you're like that field, goes be as specialized as you can in that.
In my last comments, I was sort of raising a cautious note about not exaggerating the change that has taken place and the disruption that has taken place. At the same time, it's clear that the growth is in what we often still call media. And fortunately, there are a lot of new jobs in New York coming up in that area, and that certainly is a growth. Now, I don't get a commission for getting people to attend the Young Pros at ARF, so it may sound a little self-serving, but I really think that would be a great way for you to talk to other people your age and ask them about their experience. So where do you work? How do you what's going on there and how to get there? And also get a feeling for what the culture there is in the environment to see if that's something, where you can fit. Having said that, of course, you know, there's still people who go to the Nielsen training school and learn how to measure television at Nielsen. And I think that's probably not a bad career move either.
The question is simply how to drive the research, or just
no. I want to know how to keep abreast. You know, what ways they can be as informed as someone in this field should be about the nature of changing dynamics of media audiences, whatever, you know, whether it's demographics, behavior, technology.
To get a job, right?
Yeah, to get a job, exactly. Yes. That's why they're all here.
Yes,
that's why they're all here.
You guys will be great. I think that at the end of the day, you know, my belief, which I know is probably doesn't represent the majority, or actually it does. I think there's still a minority that is into research for different reasons. I just believe, it's my hypothesis, that anybody who works in research or insights got into it because they're interested in people. So I think at the heart of any conversation you have as you get into research and talk to researchers, whether a brand or the ARF or a vendor, don't forget that. And I think that this is an industry that is you know, a beautiful heritage of measuring audiences in really dynamic, interesting ways. I mean, make no mistake, this guy is a legend. But seriousness. But I do think that, you know, understanding what you see around you. I mean, this world is looking for new ways to measure and use consumer voices to inspire stakeholders. I think my very tactical recommendation would be, aside from, you know, informational interviews and great etiquette and things like that, you know what, starting off at a brand is really interesting because you get to understand the business world through the eyes of research. And every brand uses research differently, like we heard earlier. And so I think from there, you know, there's a lot of different avenues of where you can go in a research career. But once you understand the real role research plays within the business world, you can speak to a lot of different types of researchers and business folks around the world. And I think if you don't understand that, I mean, researchers usually you can just, you know, walk into a room and have a bunch of big data. You know, you're dealing with people who aren't researchers. So you really have to learn how this industry is used in the greater ecosystem will benefit you greatly.
Can I amend my answer? Actually, just some practical advice. Mine was specific to, you know, data and research, and but I think actually Twitter is the best place. Follow people who you are interested in what they're doing, see who they follow, and that is the best way for networking, learning, and finding out the cutting edge of what's going on, so you can learn about new roles. And I was just recruited, you know, I'm not leaving, but I literally checked out the guy who wanted to interview me, and I saw the guy loved infographics and was a music fan and this and that. So I knew the point of view going into an interview, it's always good to take exploratory, even if you're interested or not, just to keep your skills tight and to learn the value if you're out there, right? Say, hey, the worst case is I get offered a job, I use it to negotiate to get a raise. But following, I learned so much on Twitter, and then I saw who he followed, and I was like, and we had a lot in common, and Twitter is the best way, I think. People at first I didn't get it, but it's really, if you follow the right people, you can learn a lot on what are the progressive things, and then also, you know, like the Horst thing. I mean, TV, I still see the #1 mover of sales out there, bar none, right? And so there's a lot of talk about where it's going. If you want to move product, you go on TV. It's that simple.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your questions.